November 15, 1978. The Beverly Hills Hotel Crystal Ballroom had been magnificently transformed into a temple of high culture. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in ivory silk. Each centerpiece a carefully arranged bouquet of white orchids flown in from Thailand that morning, each arrangement costing more than most people earned in a week. The room hummed with the quiet confidence of old money and established taste. Waiters in white gloves served Dom Perignon 1969 and beluga caviar on mother-of-pearl spoons. Every detail had been orchestrated to communicate one message. This was serious culture for serious people. This wasn't a concert. This wasn't entertainment. This was the annual Arts Foundation Charity Gala, the most exclusive cultural event on the West Coast social calendar, where Los Angeles cultural elite gathered to celebrate what they considered serious art. Opera, classical music, fine arts, the kind of culture that required decades of education to appreciate and generational wealth to properly support. The invitation list was limited to 200 people, each vetted by Patricia Pemberton's personal assistant to ensure they met the foundation's standards for cultural sophistication and financial contribution capability. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken hierarchies. Conversations revolved around recent acquisitions at major auction houses, upcoming productions at the Metropolitan Opera, and which young classical musicians deserved patronage. These were people who measured artistic worth in centuries, not chart positions, who believed that true art required suffering to create and education to understand. The guest list read like a directory of cultural sophistication. Maestro Giovanni Rossi, guest conductor of the LA Philharmonic, who had trained at La Scala and conducted for 3 different royal families, stood near the champagne fountain discussing the emotional architecture of Mahler's symphonies with Dr. Elizabeth Chen, Professor Emeritus of Musicology at USC Victoria Sterling, board member of the Metropolitan Opera House and descendant of railroad barons, moved gracefully between groups of patrons, her opinions on recent productions carrying the weight of someone who had personally known Maria Callas and Leonard Bernstein. Patricia Pemberton, president of the Arts Foundation and heiress to old California oil money, glided through the crowd with practiced precision, her grandmother's emerald necklace catching the chandelier light as she ensured every detail met her impossibly high standards. These were people who owned original Picassos not as investments, but because they understood Cubism's revolutionary impact on visual perspective. They attended private salon performances in Vienna and had personal relationships with conductors of major symphonies worldwide. Their children were raised speaking French and Italian, studying piano from age 4, and attending summer programs at European conservatories. This was a world where cultural knowledge was inherited like DNA, and artistic taste was passed down through generations like family jewels. In the corner near the stage, a small group of music critics and academics engaged in heated debate about the declining standards of American musical education. Professor William Hartford from UCLA's music department argued that popular music was destroying young people's ability to appreciate complex harmonic structures. Dr. Margaret Finley from the Los Angeles Music Academy insisted that jazz represented the last truly American art form, worthy of serious study. Their conversation was punctuated by references to obscure composers and theoretical frameworks that would have been incomprehensible to most professional musicians, let alone popular entertainers. But tonight, something unprecedented was about to happen, something that would shatter every carefully constructed assumption this room held about the difference between entertainment and art, between commercial success and cultural value, between popular appeal and artistic sophistication. 3 floors below the main ballroom, in a small dressing room tucked away near the service corridor, like an afterthought, far from the main artist suites where serious musicians prepared for serious performances, Michael Jackson sat alone on a folding chair, staring at his reflection in a mirror with a crack running diagonally across one corner. At 20 years old, he was already one of the most famous entertainers in the world, a fact that seems surreal even to him. The Jackson 5 had made him a household name before he turned 12, transforming him from a kid from Gary, Indiana, into a global phenomenon who couldn't walk down a street without being recognized. His recent solo work was breaking new ground, pushing musical boundaries that hadn't existed before he pushed them. Don't Stop Till You Get Enough was revolutionizing dance music, creating a new sound that blended rock, soul, and disco into something that hadn't existed before. Rock With You was about to dominate radio stations worldwide. His album Off the Wall was changing how people thought about what popular music could be and do. He was successful beyond most artists' wildest dreams, wealthy beyond his childhood imagination, famous to a degree that made normal life impossible. So why, sitting in this cramped room beneath one of the most prestigious hotels in America, did he feel like he was about to perform for his life? Why did his hands shake slightly as he adjusted the simple black suit he'd chosen instead of his usual stage costumes? Why did the approaching performance feel more crucial than any of the massive stadium concerts that had made him famous? The answer lay in the conversations happening just beyond his door, in the sophisticated murmurs floating down from the ballroom above, in the cultural assumptions that surrounded him like invisible walls. The cultural elite of Los Angeles didn't question Michael's talent. That was undeniable. They didn't question his success. That was obvious. What they questioned was whether any of it mattered in the way that real art was supposed to matter. Patricia Pemberton stood near the ballroom entrance, her posture perfect from decades of deportment lessons, greeting guests with the practiced charm that came from a lifetime of social obligations. But her conversation with Maestro Rossi revealed the true complexity of her feelings about tonight's unconventional addition to the program. I know, Patricia was saying, her voice carrying that particular tone wealthy people use when they're being diplomatically reasonable about something they find fundamentally unreasonable. Michael Jackson isn't exactly our usual caliber. His manager was quite insistent, and frankly, after the Rothschild Foundation pulled their funding last month, we needed something to attract the younger philanthropists. His name does draw corporate sponsors. The youth market, you understand? Their parents control substantial entertainment industry money. We need those checkbooks to keep funding the programs that really matter. Maestro Rossi, a man who had conducted for presidents and royalty, whose interpretations of Beethoven had brought audiences to tears in Vienna and Milan, nodded diplomatically while privately wondering how he had found himself in a conversation about using popular music as a fundraising tool. He is tremendously popular, of course, the maestro replied, his Italian accent lending gravity to even diplomatic statements. Talented in his particular genre. But you understand, there is a fundamental difference between making people dance and making them feel, between commercial appeal and artistic depth, between entertainment and true artistic expression that elevates the human spirit. Patricia nodded knowingly. This was exactly the distinction that separated her world from the broader entertainment industry. Precisely. We're not being snobs, Giovanni. We're maintaining standards that have existed for centuries. There's a reason some music survives and other music, well, doesn't. Meanwhile, near the bar where crystal glasses caught the chandelier, light like tiny prisms, Victoria Sterling was holding court with a carefully curated group of opera patrons, classical music critics, and academics. Her words carried the weight of someone who had spent decades not just enjoying serious music, but defining what qualified as serious music in the first place. She was known for her annual salons where young classical musicians performed for potential patrons, and her opinions could make or destroy careers in legitimate musical circles. Jackson 5 nostalgia, disco beats, synthesized production. It's all very energetic, very profitable, very successful, Victoria said, swirling her wine glass with the practiced elegance of someone whose grandmother had taught her that how you held a glass revealed your breeding. But let's be honest about what we're dealing with here. It's entertainment, not art. It serves a function. It makes people feel good. It makes them move. It sells records. But will it stand the test of time? Will scholars study it in 100 years? Mozart, Beethoven, Puccini. Now that is music that moves the soul, that requires something from the listener, that demands intellectual and emotional engagement. This is just rhythm and marketing. Dr. James Patterson, music critic for the Los Angeles Times, whose reviews were read religiously by everyone who mattered in the classical music world, added his authoritative perspective. Don't misunderstand, I have nothing against popular music. It serves its purpose in society. But when we talk about artistic merit, about music that challenges the listener intellectually and emotionally, that requires something deeper than a catchy hook or a dance beat, Well, that's a different conversation entirely. There's technique, yes, but technique in service of what? Commercial appeal. That's craft, not art. Michael could hear fragments of these conversations as staff members moved through the corridors. Each overheard comment was like a small knife, not because they were meant to be cruel, but because they dismissed everything he had worked for as shallow, temporary, unworthy of serious consideration. But here's what those sophisticated voices didn't understand. Michael Jackson wasn't just a pop star who happened to be performing at their gala. He was an artist who had been studying music since he could walk, who understood harmony and rhythm and emotional expression at a level that most formally trained musicians never reach. He had grown up in studios with the greatest producers, singers, and musicians of his era. He had absorbed jazz, soul, rock, classical, and folk influences, blending them into something entirely new. Tonight, he was going to prove that commercial success and artistic depth weren't mutually exclusive. Tonight, he was going to show the cultural elite of Los Angeles that they had completely misunderstood what he was capable of. The evening began with a performance by the Beverly Hills Chamber Quartet, playing Vivaldi with technical precision that earned respectful applause from the knowledgeable audience. Next came soprano Rebecca Martinez, whose interpretation of Puccini arias brought several patrons to tears. Each performance was introduced with detailed background about the composers, the historical context, the artistic significance. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for, though not necessarily with anticipation. Patricia Pemberton stepped to the microphone with the kind of smile that indicated duty rather than enthusiasm. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special guest tonight, someone who needs no introduction, though his presence here represents something quite unique for our Arts Foundation. Please welcome Michael Jackson. The applause was polite, respectful, the kind of applause you give when you recognize someone's fame, even if you don't understand why they're at your event. Michael walked onto the small stage alone. No backup dancers, no elaborate staging, no glittering glove or sequin jacket. He wore a simple black suit and white shirt, looking more like a young classical pianist than the pop superstar the audience expected. The room buzzed with quiet confusion. Where was his band? Where were the production elements that usually accompanied a Michael Jackson performance? He approached the piano bench and sat down, adjusting the microphone with careful precision. For a moment, he simply sat there, hands poised above the keys, looking out at 200 faces that ranged from curious to skeptical to openly dismissive. Then he began to speak, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system without any of the theatrical energy his audiences usually experienced. Good evening. I know some of you are wondering what I'm doing here. I know some of you think my music is just entertainment, just commercial product without artistic value. Tonight I want to share something with you, something that might change your understanding of what I do. The room had gone completely silent. This wasn't the Michael Jackson they expected. Michael's fingers found the piano keys, and the opening notes of Ben filled the ballroom. But this wasn't the recorded version that had topped the charts years earlier. This was stripped down, intimate, raw. Just voice and piano, showcasing every nuance of his vocal technique without any production elements to hide behind. What happened next has been described by everyone who was there as transformative. Michael Jackson's voice filled that sophisticated ballroom with a purity and emotional depth that silenced every conversation, stopped every movement, commanded every breath. This wasn't the energetic pop star performance the audience had expected. This was 4 octaves of pure vocal artistry, technique that opera singers study for decades to master, emotional expression that reached into the deepest places of human experience. Maestro Rossi, who had been politely checking his watch moments earlier, found himself leaning forward, his trained ear recognizing vocal techniques that most popular singers never attempt. Victoria Sterling's expression shifted from polite tolerance to genuine amazement as Michael effortlessly moved between registers that required different muscle groups, different breathing techniques, different artistic approaches entirely. The music critic from the Los Angeles Times had pulled out his notebook and was frantically scribbling observations, realizing that everything he thought he knew about Michael Jackson had been completely wrong. But Michael wasn't finished. As the last notes of Ben faded into silence, he seamlessly transitioned into something the audience had never heard before. A preview of Don't Stop Till You Get Enough, but transformed, acoustic, intimate, showcasing the sophisticated harmonic structure that usually got lost in the dance production. He was revealing the musical architecture beneath the commercial appeal, proving that his songs weren't just catchy hooks, but carefully crafted compositions that could stand alone as serious music. His voice soared through complex, melodic lines, while his left hand maintained intricate bass patterns on the piano. He was simultaneously singer, pianist, composer, and arranger, demonstrating a musical sophistication that most of the classically trained musicians in the room couldn't match. The transformation in the audience was visible. People who had come expecting to politely tolerate a pop star were witnessing something they hadn't anticipated: genuine artistry. This wasn't entertainment designed to make people dance or sing along. This was music designed to make people feel, think, and reconsider everything they thought they knew about the boundaries between popular and serious art. When Michael finished his second song, the ballroom erupted in applause that was completely different from the polite reception he had received. This was the kind of applause reserved for moments when an audience realizes they have witnessed something exceptional, something that has changed their understanding of what's possible. But what happened next was even more significant than the applause. Maestro Rossi was the first to approach the stage, his expression showing the kind of respect usually reserved for established classical artists. That vocal control, he said, his Italian accent thick with emotion. I work with opera singers who cannot do what you just did. The technical precision, the emotional range. This is not popular music. This is pure artistry. Victoria Sterling followed, her earlier dismissiveness completely gone. I owe you an apology, she said simply. I had no idea. What you just performed, that wasn't pop music. That was serious musical expression. I've been to Carnegie Hall, La Scala, the Metropolitan Opera, and very few performances have affected me the way yours just did. The Los Angeles Times critic approached with notebook in hand, looking somewhat embarrassed. I need to completely rewrite my article about tonight, he admitted. I came here with preconceptions about your work, about the difference between commercial and artistic music. You've just proved that those distinctions are artificial, maybe even meaningless. This was musical sophistication at the highest level. Patricia Pemberton, who had reluctantly included Michael in the evening's program, was now beaming with the pride of someone who had discovered hidden treasure. I don't think anyone in this room will ever think about your music the same way again, she told him. What you've done tonight is prove that artistic merit isn't about genre or commercial success. It's about depth, technique, emotional honesty, and pure talent. You have all of those things. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from the other performers. Rebecca Martinez, the opera singer who had performed earlier, waited until the crowd had dispersed before approaching Michael privately. I've been trained in classical technique since I was 6 years old, she said quietly. I've studied with the best vocal coaches in the world. What you just did, the breath control, the register transitions, the emotional expression, that level of natural ability combined with technical precision is extraordinary. You could sing opera tomorrow if you wanted to. The ripple effects of that performance spread far beyond the Beverly Hills Hotel ballroom. Word spread quickly through Los Angeles music industry about what had happened at the Arts Foundation Gala. Record executives who had been trying to fit Michael into conventional categories suddenly realized they were dealing with an artist whose range and capabilities they had completely underestimated. Classical music venues began reaching out, inviting Michael to perform in settings that had never before welcomed popular artists. The LA Philharmonic contacted his management about potential collaborations. Opera houses expressed interest in having him as a special guest. Music journalists who specialized in serious arts coverage began requesting interviews, wanting to explore the musical education and influences that had shaped his artistic development. Academic musicians started analyzing his compositions and vocal techniques, finding sophisticated elements that had been hidden beneath the commercial production of his recordings. The transformation wasn't just in how others saw Michael's work, it was in how Michael saw himself as an artist. In interviews after that night, he would often reference the Beverly Hills Hotel performance as a turning point. For years, I felt like I had to choose between being successful and being taken seriously as an artist, he reflected. That night taught me that I didn't have to choose. I could be both. I could make music that people love to dance to and music that challenged them intellectually and emotionally. The performance also changed how he approached his craft. The success of proving his artistic credibility to the most skeptical possible audience gave him the confidence to push even further boundaries on his next projects. The musical risks he took on Thriller, the genre-blending experimentation, the refusal to be contained within conventional categories, all of that traced back to the moment he proved to himself and others that he was more than just an entertainer. But perhaps the most lasting impact was on the cultural conversation about popular versus serious music. Michael Jackson's performance that night demonstrated that the boundaries between commercial and artistic music were artificial constructs that limited both artists and audiences. You could create music that moved people to dance and move them to tears. You could achieve massive commercial success and maintain complete artistic integrity. The recording industry took notice. Producers and executives realized that underestimating Michael Jackson's artistic capabilities was a mistake they couldn't afford to make. This led to greater creative freedom on his subsequent projects, more sophisticated production techniques, and collaborations with artists and producers who understood his full range of capabilities. Music education programs began using Michael's work as examples of how popular artists could incorporate classical techniques and sophisticated musical structures without sacrificing accessibility. His vocal performances became study materials for aspiring singers across all genres. The Beverly Hills Hotel still hosts charity galas, and occasionally, when introducing popular artists to culturally sophisticated audiences, someone will reference the night Michael Jackson performed there. This is the venue, they'll say, where assumptions about artistic merit were forever changed. Because that's what happened on November 15th, 1978. Michael Jackson didn't just perform two songs for a skeptical audience. He redefined what it meant to be both a popular and a serious artist. He proved that commercial success and artistic depth weren't mutually exclusive. He demonstrated that true artistry transcends genre boundaries and cultural prejudices. The cultural elite of Los Angeles had expected entertainment. Michael Jackson gave them art. They had prepared to politely tolerate a pop star. Instead, they witnessed the emergence of an artist whose influence would reshape not just popular music, but the entire conversation about what music could be and do. 20 minutes of performance transformed decades of assumptions about what constituted serious music. One evening changed how an entire cultural establishment thought about the relationship between accessibility and sophistication, between commercial success and artistic merit, between entertainment value and cultural significance. Michael Jackson sat down at that piano as a successful entertainer who was respected but not revered, and stood up as a recognized artist whose influence would extend far beyond the recording industry into the broader cultural conversation about art, creativity, and the arbitrary boundaries that separate different forms of human expression. The boy who had been performing since childhood, who had learned to sing before he could properly read, who had been studying music theory and vocal technique with the greatest professionals in the industry since age 6, had finally proven that he was something more than talented, more than successful, more than famous. He was an artist in the truest sense of the word, someone whose work would endure because it spoke to both the body and the soul, to both the masses and the experts, to both the present and the future, bridging divides that had seemed unbridgeable. That night at the Beverly Hills Hotel, Michael Jackson didn't just win over a tough crowd or prove his vocal abilities. He won the right to be taken seriously as one of the most important artists of his generation, someone whose influence would reshape not just popular music, but the entire conversation about what music could be and accomplish. And everything that came after, every boundary he crossed, every genre he redefined, every assumption he challenged, every barrier he broke down between popular and serious art, can be traced back to that transformative moment when he sat at a piano in front of the most skeptical audience imaginable and reminded the world that true artistry knows no boundaries, respects no artificial limitations, and speaks a universal language that transcends class, education, and cultural prejudice completely and eternally in all forms of artistic expression.